Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Constance Sayers, and I'm the president of Government Executive Media Group. Welcome to today's program, The New Normal, What's Next for IT Modernization, hosted by NextGov and underwritten by Cisco. In the face of a global pandemic, IT modernization has never been more important to ensuring the federal government is able to meet its mission and deliver critical services. As agencies look beyond COVID-19 response, what comes next for modernization priorities? Today, we're going to highlight how agencies are building on tech successes in a trying time to expedite tech innovation and build a more resilient IT infrastructure for the future. I'm excited to dive into the modernization roadmap for agencies looking forward to a new normal. This webcast is being recorded and will be available for the on-demand program. Now let's dive right in. Joining me today is Walter Makish, Director of Civilian Operations at Cisco. Thanks for joining me today, Walter.
Nice to be here. My role at Cisco, I will say, changed quite significantly when, a couple months ago. Before COVID, it was to manage, of course, the 300 or so folks that we have basically interacting with our government customers, specifically in the civilian market. Post the pandemic, it became I was one of many folks, one of 300, just trying to help solve these problems when it comes to response to COVID, when it comes to the way that our government customers were kind of rotating. It was amazing to see just how quickly the government was able to respond. And for us, it was important in terms of the role that we were playing to have everybody basically shoulder to shoulder, ensuring that we were handling what was coming to us as well as possible. I have not worked so many weekends, nights, and others on just purely solving kind of technology problems, process problems, and just trying to help figure out how we respond to this, which, as I said, I just commend the government in terms of the way that it has been responded to.
You've definitely talked about the speed. I recall you saying that, things that looked like they might have taken years or months and took, days and weeks. And so it just was so accelerated around this pace. So we just heard a lot of great stories about, where the government is accelerating its IT modernization. And I want to focus on citizen services. So the last session, we heard some, amazing things like 1,000% increase at the VA in things like telehealth visits, but that can tax the system. So how can agencies leverage IT modernization to transform the services that they provide to citizens, especially in such a critical time?
So as it relates to those services, I think the three most important things are security, ease of access, and ease of use, right? As it just relates to the way that our citizens are planning on interacting with the government here moving forward. In terms of remote capabilities, that couldn't be more important. For us, when we look at modernization, right? Modernization is not necessarily new. It's not brought on by the pandemic. Modernization is a response in a lot of ways to the aging infrastructure that is currently facing, our government has been now for several years. For us, we like to look at what are those mission outcomes that our customers are moving towards? What do they need to ensure that they're enabling in the next 3 to 5 years? And then we look at building a transformational roadmap so that the investments that are being made from a modernization perspective and an IT debt perspective really pave the way for enabling those mission outcomes. We call that the transformational roadmap. I've done that with a number of our customers, and those roadmaps have been accelerated as a result of the pandemic.
That's great. And so typically when you're starting an engagement, you start with the mission.
Always. And it's mission outcomes, and it's looking 3 to 5 years out. Because as you're making these, multi-million and even billion-dollar investments, it's just so important that it's not replacing like for like. Alan talked about SD-WAN and some of the new technologies that are coming out from a WAN perspective. That will allow the government to leapfrog their commercial brethren in many cases. But it's very important that we don't just look at essentially replacing device by device and keeping some of the same technology that's been in place for a long time. We need to be looking towards the future, looking towards those mission outcomes, and be designing architectures and infrastructure with that in mind.
Well, on the commercial technology, government has traditionally been slower than the private sector in adopting commercial technology as a service. But we're really starting to see that change. So where do you see the biggest leap in government's use of tech as a service?
Without a doubt, we have a lot to thank GSA for and the team Alan spoke to earlier. I mean, EIS is purpose-built for accelerating as a service. So that's just incredibly helpful, I think, in the conversations we're having directly with those agencies and departments. They've all been complimentary in terms of thanking GSA for building a vehicle to that end. So that's been extremely critical. Now, when you look at moving towards cloud and as a service technologies, it's important to do the due diligence on the providers, right? So from a reliability perspective, truly understanding that HA architecture, the HA posture that's out there, the high availability, and what happens if there is kind of a breakdown, what's the level of expectation with respect to service. The next is security, right? Certifications are certainly one thing, but they're table stakes. Essentially, if you don't truly understand the security that's being provided by those as a service providers or being utilized by those as a service providers, you can sometimes, the certifications just aren't necessarily enough. And sometimes there are specific asks that we as a service provider have been asked with respect to building security on certain platforms. And we've done that in order to make sure that we understand the unique, security challenges facing some of our customers. And then lastly, it's weighing that performance and capability improvement against cost, right? So there can be a very cheap as a service solution. And sometimes that fits the bill, but in some cases, if you really look at the performance and the capability improvements that you're trying to make as a result of moving to as a service, the ultimate long-term total cost of ownership is a much different story than just what is that kind of initial capital investment.
Yeah. I mean, we're certainly in an unprecedented time, and it's highlighted the need for resilience across an organization. In your mind, what are the biggest lessons that you've heard from government agencies around building a resilient IT infrastructure?
I would say the number one lesson is to not necessarily wait for that pandemic, right? I mean, Mr. Cassatt talked about the fact that some of these technologies we need to be able to scale them down, right? I mean, the VA in that increased capacity was something that was a very, very difficult technical problem to solve, and it was solved within a weekend, right? In terms of doubling up on that capacity. If anybody out there hasn't seen kind of the write-ups that have been done that are sitting on the VA website, I beg you to go look at that, because it was a lot that went into that in a very, very short time. And an organization that size to be able to double capacity was just absolutely mind-blowing. It was also, again, ensuring that we were in constant communication with OMB, with Mr. Hill and his team, and recognizing what they were telling agencies, how they were guiding agencies in terms of that resilience and how to improve that resilience over this period of time. So acting collectively in terms of the vendor community, the customers, the decisions they were making, as well as OMB and GSA with the guidance that they were providing, that was extremely important. And I think we managed to do that in terms of staying coordinated with each one of those different players, as opposed to building resilience at a point in time, or basically just in each unique situation to solve that one unique problem.
We're starting to see the ease of telework guidance, certainly. And I think that was a necessity, as you heard, certainly for competitiveness, even for jobs. But as we head back into the office, looking forward, I think that leaders are going to need to plan for a post-COVID kind of hybrid workforce situation where you're both remote and you're in the office. But work requires a fast network. It requires strong application performance and good collaboration tools like WebEx, which I'm just going to give a shout out to y'all. The platform that you're actually viewing right now is actually your WebEx platform. So no matter where they are, they need those tools. So what does this look like, and how can government leaders start planning for that in the future? Which is just basically a new way we work.
It is. It is. So as you evaluate those tools today, in staying with WebEx, right? It's just important to understand from a mission perspective how you need those tools to operate and what you need those tools to do. So for us, WebEx, we've always focused on essentially scale, right? The feature set, the reliability, the security, and each one of those pieces. And that's really for our customers what they love about WebEx and why they continue to use it. If you look at more of the coming back, as you mentioned, and that kind of hybrid workforce that we're going to have for a long time to come, we at Cisco, when we do briefings, we bring customers out to San Jose, right, for our executive briefing center. And one of the most popular things for customers to do, and this is pre-pandemic, was to actually say, Cisco, how are you designing your offices, and how are you using your own kind of collaboration technologies and so on and so forth? It's one of my favorite sessions and one of the most impactful for us every time we get out there to that headquarters campus. If you have the opportunity to do that when we're flying, we'd love to host you. But
I want to take you up.
now, what we're being told in terms of, being one of the benchmarkers in that aspect of the industry, the way that Cisco is rotating is by really leveraging some of the tools that are actually already out there. So a tool like proximity. So with proximity, and this is now the mandate, right? When you walk into a Cisco office, you cannot actually put your hands on any of the equipment that's actually in a conference room. So anything to make the video technology work, anything to make, any of those systems that are in there, kind of get ready for that to host and do that collaboration. Proximity allows you to actually just use your handheld device and essentially operate every single system, whether it's WebEx, whether it's the telepresence, the video, your desktop. Every single device can be used with your phone, and the devices all know that you're there as soon as you walk into the room. So again, it's proximity. It's a really neat tool, and we are going to be relying on that heavily as we bring that hybrid workforce back to work.
That's great. I mean, that's great. Certainly, there's been tension in this time between security and ease of use. You had a lot of people who were moving out and didn't have IT systems and had to, go to their homes to work. So we've seen, that tension between security and ease of use on display for a while now. And I think the government has really needed to grapple with that balance head on during this maximum telework period. So looking forward and moving into more of a hybrid work situation, what role is IT modernization going to play in enabling a secure but flexible workforce?
So I think this is where zero trust networks are so incredibly timely. We're actually the largest security provider in the world, in the industry. And so for Cisco, when we look at zero trust architecture, what we see is that you need a tool that builds on itself, right? Not something that is a bolt on. You need a tool that essentially can do various elements of the zero trust architecture right out of the box, right? So Forrester does a great study on zero trust architecture and the various vendors out there and kind of how they're approaching it. And again, for us, it's that when we look at routers, switches, every aspect of your security footprint, and of course firewalls and so on, security needs to be a part of the architecture itself, not something that is bolted on at the last minute, or I shouldn't say the last minute, but just after the fact, because those tools just inherently aren't going to work as well together.
Right. And certainly just switching over to innovation, over the past few months, there's been a lot of innovation as agencies have been forced to adapt quickly. So as an important part of IT modernization, how can these agencies continue to innovate in the future?
So innovation has always just got to be, you've got to keep the mission in mind, right? And those mission outcomes, kind of where we started this conversation. So looking 3 to 5 years out, what innovation is necessary to create those outcomes? Our best actually opportunities to interface with customers is when we get them together directly with the people that we have in San Jose and other places that are actually designing the products and the products, so that they can ensure that the innovation that our government customers and other customers are looking for is always in the back of their mind as they're designing projects or designing products, excuse me. From my perspective, if I look at where is the most innovation going to come from, AI and ML is clearly a focus. So DoD has had that as a focus now for some time. Civilian, we're obviously making enormous leaps and bounds to kind of catch up to some extent, but also to understand how those outcomes that we're looking for are going to be enabled by AI and ML. And 5G, of course, as everybody says, is going to really propel that forward in terms of our capability and the ability to use and set up those tools for AI.
I mean, it really is an unprecedented time between, 5G and AI. And really, we have EIS and we have, new guidance from TIC 3.0. It's really a unique time. And I've been doing this now for more than 20 years, and it just feels like things are really propelling faster than ever now, which is a great thing. To close, I'd love to get your boldest prediction for the future of IT modernization. So as our audience looks towards what is next, what absolutely must be on their radar in your mind?
So the boldest prediction that I can make, that's a tough one with the word boldest, because I'm not going to be the only person saying this, but I would tell you that the boldest prediction out there is that when we think about the technologies that we put in place to respond to this pandemic, those technologies are going to be a big part of the way that we do business moving forward. So, the remote access, the remote collaboration tools, all of those elements are not going to be here today, gone tomorrow, but are going to be really at the heart of the way that we design architecture systems and the like moving forward.
Well, I mean, it's going to have to be also to keep one of the things we always talk about in conjunction with technology is workforce. You can't, in order to be competitive, we're going to have flexible tools. I mean, to stay competitive in the workforce for the federal government.
Exactly. I mean, again, to circle back to one of the things that I said, I just have never been prouder of, our organization here at Cisco, but then in addition, our country and the way that we've responded. Certainly there's been highs and lows and everybody's got opinions, but the reality is that the way that our government responded in terms of building these systems, the continuation of citizen services and being able to provide those citizen services. If you had asked me before the pandemic, if you had asked me 6 months ago, if we would have been able to continue to provide those services the way that we have, it would have been challenging, right, to really think that we could have accomplished what we have in the last 3 to 6 months. It's been absolutely unbelievable to watch and to be a part of. And I just I thank the folks on this call, and I thank the folks that were part of the response and part of the solution.
It's really an amazing story, and thank you so much, and thanks to Cisco for everything that you do, and also just thank you for sponsoring our session today. And it really is a lot of great information to get out to everybody. And I just thank you, Walter, for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Frank Conkle, and I'm the executive editor for NextGov. Our program today is The New Normal, What's Next for IT Modernization, hosted by NextGov and underwritten by Cisco. In the face of a global pandemic, IT modernization has never been more important to ensuring the federal government is able to meet its mission and deliver critical services. As agencies look beyond COVID-19 response, what comes next for modernization priorities? Today, we're going to highlight how some agencies are building on tech successes in a trying time. We're going to see what they've done, modernizing their infrastructure and moving beyond. So I'm excited to dive in the conversation. Before we get to that, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. To the right of your screen, you're going to find several icons, including a Q&A tab, which allows you to ask questions. I'll be fielding those probably closer to 1:30 or so, but ask them at any time, and I will make sure to get to them. This webcast is being recorded, and will be available for the on-demand program later on. Now, I'm going to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Dorothy Aronson. She's the Chief Information Officer for the National Science Foundation. We have Dominic Cassatt. He's the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary and Deputy CIO for the Department of Veteran Affairs. And Alan Hill is the Acting Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Category Management for the General Services Administration. We're going to get to a bunch of questions with you guys, but I'd love for you to give a little bit of information about yourselves and your role in your respective agencies here to begin. Dorothy, go ahead and unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself as we get started here.
Thanks very much, Frank. Thank you for having me. My name is Dorothy Aronson. I'm the Chief Information Officer and the Chief Data Officer at the National Science Foundation. So the NSF, our role is to fund research in nearly every scientific discipline. It's a relatively small agency, about 1,600 people, and I think that about summarizes me. Anything else you want to know?
Oh, we'll get to it.
Okay, good.
Thanks. Dominic, go ahead.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Dominic Cassatt. I'm the Deputy CIO for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Been in this role about 2 years. Prior to that, I was the Chief Information Security Officer, or CISO, for the VA for 2 years. And then joined VA after 12 years in the Pentagon at the Department of Defense in the CIO's office there. When I left, I was one of the deputy CISOs there. And then prior to that, I was in industry. I worked for IBM as a senior managing consultant for about 6 years. And prior to that, at SAIC, and then a few other system integrators, mostly doing federal government work. So enjoyed my time in all those spots. Just a little bit about the VA. It's really a massive organization. It's a Fortune 10 sized entity with over a $200 billion annual budget. We have about a $5 billion IT budget that we oversee, and our office runs all the IT for the whole department. It's not just a policy shop. We actually own, operate, run all the IT for the department. Our three main business lines are health, benefits, and cemeteries, and I'll probably talk a little bit more about those during the discussion. And also of interest is our fourth mission that not a lot of people are familiar with, in that we are the failover for the United States healthcare system. So if at any time, say for COVID, for instance, our healthcare system gets overwhelmed, the VA is there to help and will act as a failover. And we also do that for our the Department of Defense's military hospitals. So if there's ever a military conflict and their hospitals are overwhelmed, the VA also serves as a backup for the military. So pretty important mission. Happy to be here. Proud to be here. My father was a World War II veteran, and I have 7 uncles and only 7 uncles, and they were all veterans. So glad to give back to the VA. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominic. Alan, go ahead.
Thank you, Frank. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to participate in today's panel. At GSA, I provide the executive leadership for over the category management portfolio. That consists of several vehicles that come out about $9 billion in IT products and services that we provide support for. Solutions include the GWAC vehicles, Alliant 2, Alliant Small Business 2, Vets 2, and as you've heard recently in the news, 8A Stars. One news note of that is that we released a pre-solicitation for Stars 3, which is going to have a $50 billion ceiling. And we also are increasing the Stars 2 ceiling to $22 billion. So that's some news that's breaking. I also have EIS, Enterprise Infrastructure Solution, which is the $50 billion modernization contract for the network infrastructure. U.S. Access Shared Services, along with other programs. My team focuses on to ensure ITC continues to play a critical role in the administration's IT modernization effort to drive a more efficient government for the American people. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. All right, so we'll kind of keep this order going. I think one of the most obvious and probably important questions for each of you is, we're having this conversation in the midst of a pandemic that doesn't have an immediate end in sight. I'd like to hear how each of you have responded and how your organizations have responded, and some of the lessons learned here as you guys have been forced to do things like migrate to remote operations. So Dorothy, let's start with you, then we'll keep that same order with Dominic and Alan and get some of these really broad but important questions out of the way.
Thank you, Frank. The National Science Foundation, which I now call Virtual NSF, went to transition from being an agency where the majority of the people worked full-time in the headquarters building to a 100% virtual organization almost overnight. In fact, it was, we had all been well equipped with telework experience because 2 years prior, we moved from Arlington to Alexandria. We moved our headquarters. And at that time, we outfitted the entire staff with what we call seamless mobile computers, which are laptops that have easy access to NSF email and file systems. And then there's a built-in VPN that takes you right into NSF services. So the whole workforce was equipped with this kind of system, and we had been using them more or less attached to docking stations and were working in the building. About a third of the people were regular teleworkers, and so we had a lot of telework experience also. I personally never teleworked. I do most of my work is interacting with people. So I just never really even tried teleworking, except for possibly one day when I had a huge amount of writing to do. But anyway, so when we went in mid-March, when we went to transition to 100% telework, it was very, very smooth. However, the other part of our strategy at NSF is to be continuously modernizing. So what was happening, we're always in the midst of deploying new products, and we had piloted Zoom at the time, but we hadn't deployed it. And so we expedited that deployment from being, say, several months long to being overnight. And so everyone moved from being, we had a mixed bag of virtual interaction tools, and then we moved to 100% Zoom at the same time as the move. And that happened very well. So we also we were in the process of deploying a new document routing system that included electronic signature. So we did the same thing with that. We expedited the deployment immediately after the move to virtual NSF. And so we solved those problems very quickly and seamlessly as we moved. So it was a really easy transition. I think the main thing that is important that we learned, well, there's a couple of things. One is that people can make transitions a lot quicker than we think they can, and that they think they can. People are more resilient and adaptable than they had been. But and so that's across the board. The other thing that was interesting was that our eyes became open. We became very clearly aware of how effective telework could be. And so before that, there had been lingering questions, can I really do my work remotely? There was questions about how do I supervise a person who's working remotely? There was, concern about that. And all of that has been vanquished. All of those fears have been vanquished as a result of this transformation. And so I think moving forward, that can't be unlearned. We will probably continue to be much more of a virtual organization in the future than we had been in the past.
That's a good broad overview. We'll get into some specific questions on that. Dominic, how about you?
Sorry, groping for that mic mute button. Thanks. It's been quite an experience for the VA, because I shared with you a bit about the scope and scale of the VA a little while ago. We have about 20 million veterans in our system, and about 9 million of them are patients in our Veterans Health Administration. And then we have about 5 million beneficiaries receiving benefits from our benefits organization. And then we also have about 141 veteran cemeteries that we operate that have millions of visitors each year traversing them. So as you can imagine, all these types of services are 24/7 by nature. We don't have the option not to do remote. We knew that when this hit, and for the safety of our staff and for the veterans who they're caring for, we had to facilitate a remote environment. That was no easy feat. And I didn't even mention we have about 400,000 employees in the VA that needed their work. And that doesn't even include contractors. So we had a huge workforce that we needed to support. So it was really, kind of two elements. It was this huge workforce, and then the telehealth, telecounseling, telehearing kind of capabilities that would provide outreach out to the veterans. So, we immediately scrambled the jets, so to speak, to get all hands on deck, and we got ourselves up to, as of right now, we're up to over 27,000 video connect visits, telehealth visits per day. And that's an increase from about 2,000 a day. So that's over 1,000% increase in our daily telehealth visits. And then we quadrupled the telehealth system capacity to support concurrent visits. So we used to be able to handle about 3,000 concurrent visits at any given time, and now we can support more than 15,000 concurrent visits. This surge is interesting. This is an area we've wanted to delve into more as a force multiplier, and now we're showing that we can actually do it, and people want to do it. So, it'll be interesting to see how this sustains beyond the COVID remediation. Tele ICU is an interesting aspect of it too. We deployed more than 200 tele ICU carts to 88 Veterans Health sites. Really, because we hear a lot about the ICUs getting filled with patients, so we needed to really expand that capability and use a tele ICU capability to again do that force multiplier. And then our veterans were hungry for information. They wanted to know what was going on, what do they do if they feel like they have symptoms, and that could quickly overwhelm our system, with all the inquiries. So we really ramped up our vet text messaging capability up to about 8 million, servicing about 8 million veterans. We added abilities to have chatbots online so that if they wanted to ask questions online, we could support those. I'll also mention another thing. Those 400,000 employees, to get them ready for telework, they didn't all have laptops and mobile devices. A lot of them were used to going to a brick and mortar office. They had desktop computers. So one of the things we've done is we've increased. We've ordered about 160,000 laptops and over about 100,000 mobile devices. And we shipped about, just to give you an idea, we shipped about 21,000 laptops last week, and we've shipped over 67,000 since COVID began. And we've shipped over almost 10,000 phones to date to really increase the mobile capacity of our workforce. So, and then there's, of course, account generation for new staff. We've been ramping up some new temporary staff to support the increase in traffic in our facilities. And we had to add about 24,000 new accounts for the users. And we did about 3,100 new accounts last week. And we got to the point where we can establish a new account in about a couple of days from when we know that person's coming on board. And that's no easy feat because, there's background investigations, background checks that have to occur. There's vetting, there's configuring, because VA has very sensitive data on their networks. We have all the PII, personally identifiable information, and PHI, personal health information for all of our veterans. So we really need to we can't just willy-nilly create accounts. So there's a lot of rigor that goes behind how we create the accounts and the privilege management and rights management. So it took some doing to get us down. So, our mantra was, we want our surge support staff to be ready to work, immediately and day one. When they hit the ground at the site, when they report to duty, they got to be ready to work. So, just to give you, sort of a taste of, what we had to do for online support, teleservices, and then actually, getting our workforce equipped to meet this need indefinitely.
Right. That's a huge, that 1,000% jump in visits per day is crazy. But that's also sort of what you have to do, right? People don't want to go anywhere. They don't want to go to their appointments in person. And some of those numbers are pretty insane too. That, almost 200,000 laptops, 100K mobile devices. So that's kind of a good what. We'll get into the how in a little bit here. Alan, talk a little bit about the what on your end at GSA. You guys are involved with really, operating contract vehicles that benefit all of government. A lot of the stuff we're talking about here is because of GSA contract vehicles that allow for rapid buying. And you guys have had a rapid response as well.
Thank you, Frank. Let me kind of back a little bit on my side of being in operations at my previous agency. So we had a number of events that occurred that necessitated the need to enable a mobile workforce. We went from, as Dominic talked about, we went from a desktop environment to a mobile device environment. In addition, also our network wasn't able to scale for that mobile environment. We leveraged both the GSA US Access shared service for identity management. We leveraged GSA's FSSI to support the mobile workforce, mobile services. And then we also leveraged networks to create this type of security architect, both on using MTIPs and their network services. But that took several years to build out those capabilities. We didn't have like COVID kind of making us have to jump right through hoops to kind of develop that kind of capability. And in the case of it was at the Department of Education, they didn't have it was not anything to them to move to a mobile workforce. Same as at GSA. GSA is a very mobile agency. We were able to quickly move to mobile. Whereas some of the other agencies didn't have that kind of agility because they still had some legacy type things still in place. So fast forward, where some of the agencies didn't have that luxury, we got this big push of agencies coming in where they needed some really rapid IT ramp up for them. Things like contract requirements to build a process, increase capacity, add an additional business continuity, license for remote access, and conference capabilities. Just are a few of the kind of things that agencies need. So what we did is we prioritized the COVID modifications, contract modifications, and processed them in an average about 5 days, which usually you're talking a month or 2 months time for normal modifications. But we were doing this. We brought our teams together, made sure that we were very proactive in helping to support the agencies. So VAs was one of the agencies we actually supported, along with the SBA and HHS, which they all have obviously extremely important roles in support of the COVID response. And I'll give you an example for HHS. They had to scale for security capabilities. They came to us and we worked side by side with them. And we went from initial discussions to an actual EIS task order award on EIS in about a month's time frame. And that's almost like using a 8A sole source type thing to get to that kind of response. But we recognized the needs to adjust our process and ensure that we were able to support agencies. And we were using those lessons learned from that, not only for just COVID, but also future needs. So thank you, Frank.
So I'm just wondering, we'll go back to Dorothy. So on the how aspect, you said operations fairly seamlessly went from mostly in office to almost 100% remote. So a couple questions there. One, you said you're using video conferencing capabilities, a platform that works for everyone, that's, I assume, secure enough. And then two, just a sort of a workforce related question. What has it been like handling a staff or managing employees from afar? Because one of the big challenges we've always heard is that it's difficult. And I myself am in this position where I have a staff that's all remote. I haven't seen them in like 4 months. How do you ensure that work is getting done, and how do you sort of assess performance in this situation?
So let's start with the second question, since I'm having trouble remembering the first one. The second question was about workforce and how do I feel about the people. So I'm going to say that honestly, in the beginning, I had a really hard time. NSF's leadership was always 100% people first. I personally had a hard time feeling like we were connected. We were connected, but there was this sense of not, in my mind, of being somehow disconnected. And I think that came from the fact that a lot of my interactions are informal. A lot of the interactions I have with people are in the elevator, or in the kitchen, or between meetings. And so I really miss that informal connection. With respect to, once I kind of overcame that and figured out that there are 4 different ways to chat with people, and sort of reinitiated the informal conversations as well as the formal ones, I just feel like we're as intimately connected, although there's no hugging. We're as intimately connected as we have been in the past. And I don't have serendipitous interactions. I don't have, accidental interactions, but I do feel like I know what people are working on. And in fact, I think that the people are much more, the COVID-19 has struck a chord with people, and the social issues that are occurring in the United States right now. People are very committed to work. I find that more, in many cases, more is getting done. So not only were people responding to COVID, but all along I've been asking people, well, what can we take off your plate? Because you're obviously overwhelmed with all the other work you're doing. You can't possibly be doing it all, but people want to. So what I've seen is just everyone giving more than I would have expected and staying much more connected. Do you want to remind me of your first question?
Sure. It was just around tools that you're using now from your own environment. Yes. And I think that will apply to all 3 of you guys, but go ahead.
Yeah. So with respect to tools, we were in the government cloud using Zoom, or at least that we transitioned immediately into the government cloud using Zoom 100%. People adopted the tool very quickly. And in spite of the security scares that occurred in the beginning, we were not really at risk, even though there was some PR around that initially. We also have other tools, Teams. We don't use some of the older tools that we had been using, like WebEx and BlueJeans, they were our previous generation tools. But we always have multiple things going at once. So, I think, of course, email and those things, but we're pretty connected, of course. And then there's all the phone stuff. We have that.
So just sticking with you, Dorothy, for a second, you have sort of a dual role. You're also the chief data officer at the National Science Foundation. I wonder how this has impacted your work there. And, maybe you can elaborate. Are you still able to do that dual hat kind of role?
Yes. Interestingly, the IT world was much more mature and well established when COVID hit. The data, because in the last year, the Evidence Act and the Federal Data Strategy, new laws have come out associated with data and use of data to make decisions. And so there's a heightened amount of work to comply with those new laws. And so really, I see my role shifting from 20% data to 80% data, 20% IT. So, and the other issue that's very important is that the CARES Act had some important language about controlling and identifying the spending, tracking the spending associated with the CARES Act. So NSF had been funding research associated with coronavirus and other viruses years and years in the past. So we had, even before the COVID-19, we had research going on in this area. And what happened with the CARES Act was we got a lot more money, and we started investing more quickly using an abbreviated procurement process that we call RAPIDS, in order to get money out quickly to people who were doing specifically COVID-19 research. And so we have changed our reporting structure so that we can make the results of that data available to the public very easily.
Gotcha. And I'm going to pick on you, but also you've mentioned in previous conversations a phrase called continuous modernization. So what does that mean for NSF? And then can you give us some examples of, say, the before and during the pandemic, how that's changed the approach? I mean, were you able to continue all the individual modernization efforts you had prior through the pandemic, or did you have to alter and troubleshoot? How did that work?
Some of the main people that were affected by the COVID-19 are the operations people. So we really have three phases of modernization. There's operations, there's continuous modernization, which is continuing to upgrade and patch and move to the next version of all the tools that we currently have. And then there's innovation, which is taking things that are not currently in our tool set and evaluating those and integrating those into our business model. And so all three of those are going on. Layers of change are going on at one time, all the time. And what we did was really all of those continued to a great extent. The middle category where we were doing ongoing modernization, that has had a hit. That's taken a hit a little bit, but we've also had a surge in operations costs. So what we do is we shift the funds to where they're needed. We shift them around from the various categories to where they're needed. And so there has been a tiny hit, but in the long run, I don't think it's going to be a noticeable one. And the innovation continued pretty much exactly on course, because the people that were doing that work didn't have any reliance on the physical facility. Most of them were already working electronically, 100% electronically anyway.
Gotcha. Thanks, Dorothy. All right, so Dominic, moving over to you. You explained the what quite well. I mean, we're talking about, almost 30,000 video connect visits a day, 1,000% increase there. Your customer base is enormous. We're talking 8-9 million veterans getting healthcare every year from you guys. And then, a couple 100,000 devices that are in shipment, which is just massive in itself. So let's talk about the how. I imagine cloud computing probably played some kind of role in here. It seems to have been one of the tools that's been used even more in this period of time. But you've also got extra concerns around security, device security, remote operations, that you're one of the guys that the buck kind of stops with you. So let's talk a little bit about these challenges that you faced and sort of how you're working through them even today.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, Frank. Let me step back a little bit. So when I'm talking about the how we did this, I got to step back about 5 years ago. At VA, we started an IT modernization and a VA digital transformation. So we knew with how we were seeing services that were being provided to the veterans, more and more depending on IT to be delivered. There's really no way these days to deliver health benefits and cemetery management without IT capabilities. So we knew we didn't just need to upgrade our systems, we needed to transform. So for that transformation, we focused on 5 things. Customer service was our prime directive. We wanted to have delighted customers in our administrations and with the veterans. We wanted to hit on that IT modernization, really modernize and innovate our aging infrastructure. And using new modern principles like DevSecOps, Agile, product line management, ITIL, not just try and reinvent using the old principles. Strategic sourcing was the third. Buying smarter, using category management, leveraging our size and our buying power, getting economies of scale. Our IT workforce is the fourth. We knew we needed to focus on that workforce, make sure they're equipped to deliver what we needed, and we want to retain them. And then finally, seamless and secure interoperability. We needed the data to get where it needed to get, when it needed to get there, and it needed to maintain its availability, integrity, and confidentiality in transit and at rest. Again, very sensitive data, very critical to our healthcare providers to have the data they need when they need it to save lives. So this is what comprised our transformation that we had, fortunately started about 4 or 5 years ago. We also, as a result of this, we adopted a buy first and cloud first approach to how we handled new acquisitions and new enhancements for our systems. So we really wanted to leverage the best and the brightest that industry had to offer. We wanted to get away from GOTS and reinventing things on our own. So that helped us a lot to have instituted that approach years ago. So, our presence in commercially provided government cloud really helped immensely, that we were ready. We have several cloud presences. And when it came to scaling up these services, like I described in the what, having those cloud environments there, ready to go, secured, all the interfaces developed, it gave us so many more options. It made us so much more flexible. And then, we did things because of those solid cloud environments, and because of some of the IT modernization we did for our infrastructure, our backbone, our bandwidth. We were able to double our VPN capacity from about 120K users to a day concurrently to about 240,000 users. And we're trying to get it up to about 300,000 users. We have another optimized non-VPN secure remote access solution that used to be at about 16,000 capacity. Now we're pushing it to over 117,000. And to do that, we quadrupled the virtual servers we use to support these remote access applications from about 1,700 servers to about 7,600 servers. So you're hearing a lot of orders of magnitude here of exponential growth. And, we really couldn't have done that if we wouldn't have started that digital transformation. Another thing we did during that transformation was move to a service-oriented approach, and we implemented a whole new help desk system and ticketing system. And that allowed us to field a spike of about 50,000 support tickets in March, which is that brings us up about 250% from the previous month. So if we wouldn't have done that and done that modernization, we would have been crushed by the help desk tickets and inquiries that we saw. I'll just mention a couple other things for the how. I mentioned workforce. You can't mention that enough. Because of the improvements we made in our workforce, the coding, the professionalization, the training, the certification, and the incentives, incentive pay and retention programs we've been able to put in place, and then the 2210 direct hire authority for IT professionals that we can do direct hire if we find good skilled candidates and get them on board quickly. We saw our attrition rates really go down over the last 4 or 5 years. So we're not having that brain drain of IT, and we're keeping our very skilled talent on board, so they're ready. They know the environment, they're skilled, they're ready to react. That helped a lot. And then one thing VA has going for us, the one thing I always tell people I don't have to do in my job is motivate people about the mission. Our staff loves helping the veterans, and over 60% of our IT staff are veterans. So we have a very motivated staff, and focusing on that workforce really helped. And Dorothy mentioned the CARES Act. That really did help. Congress did step up, gave us some funding to fill some gaps from a technology perspective, and also hire some temporary staff, which was great. So we took advantage of that. And OMB helped out with providing the federal government some latitude in some policies that allowed us to streamline and quicken getting telehealth solutions out to the field, and vetting employees so that we could react quickly and get staff on the ground quickly and ready to work day one, like I said before. And, have an OMB work with us to kind of, still provide us, secure policy basis and guidelines for doing these things, but giving us a little more leeway and, sort of catching up with some of the details later, that were low risk. That was fantastic too. All those things came together to make us a success.
I was going to ask Dominic. I imagine that right when we were considering moving remotely, there had to have been, it would have been interesting to be a fly on the wall in the conversations that you were having in, oh my God, we got to do this, this, and this.
Yep.
It had to have been a high stress time, but it does seem like some of these efforts may scale out for the future. The workforce one particularly is interesting to me just because with this more shift to remote operations, it sort of mirrors what's happening in the private sector. And we always hear that it's that keeping your talent is challenging enough if you make them come into an office all day, every day. And so maybe some of this will help the agency going forward. A mission-driven agency like yours, even.
You're absolutely right. It's definitely a draw. We want to draw young, skilled talent and a good mix of seasoned talent who they have a lot of offers out there to, work remotely or have flexible work-life balance situations. We want to offer that too. We did have a skeptical leadership workforce that wasn't sure how that would work in a remote environment. Would they get the output? Would they have the control? And I'll tell you, just sort of like Dorothy said, it's turning the tide. People are seeing, if we can use collaboration tools, to the greatest extent we can. You can be online. You can connect with people very quickly. You have very rich experiences with video and chat and sharing files through video. Having like Zoom sessions or Teams meetings, people didn't realize the capacity for a robust workforce experience, and it's kind of turning them around. So I think we might see a real new normal, when we all return.
Certainly going to be a fascinating aspect to watch. Alan, let's get over to you on some of the how here. I want to talk about as a service offerings because that's been so much more important in the last few months. Sort of what the future of networks looks like for government. But one thing you mentioned briefly before was how quickly you guys were able to modify contracts to make them work better, faster for agencies in need. Some of those ones like VA and others that got some funding to turn around and spend that. So give me a little bit on all those topics if you can.
Sure. So I like to back it up a little history here. I was reading an article the other day. It was saying in 2018, CIOs, 4% of CIOs were planning to invest in their network. And you can't use the cloud effectively if you don't have a network that isn't built around the technologies that the cloud is based on. So, and I'm going to give you an example of what we're talking about in technologies and being able to scale. Yesterday, network architects and technologies aren't built for the cloud. So we got to change it out. And I'm not talking about TDM, which was built in the 1950s, 60s. I'm talking about MPLS that comes from the late 2000s, late 1990s, 2000 timeframe. Cloud leverages software-defined networking. We need to move our networks to an architect that's based on software-defined networking. For example, software-defined wide area network, SD-WAN. It provides elastic capability. It's less expensive. It's more secure and provides much higher performance capabilities than MPLS does. It's meant to support the cloud. With SD-WAN, your network becomes more cloud-like with the ability to expand and contract based on your business demand. What we were dealing with in modifications were still the traditional types of networks and doing those things. And that's not what we need in the future state. So for those agencies that are still using MPLS, probably should get the whiteboard out I'm sure they are doing that right now, and look at how they can move to a more cloud friendly network. Right now in EIS, you can look at the different SD-WAN solutions that vendors have available there and what those costs associates with them. But Small Business Administration, they're replacing their MPLS with SD-WAN. And this allows these agencies to be able to expand and contract when we have these kind of crises, or there's surge in work requirements. You also need unified communications. In my previous agency, I went in and they were talking about, let's implement Office 365 with the unified communication capabilities. And I looked at the number and I said, we can't do that because it isn't built to support it. And so that's why we focused on building out the network first before offering those type of offerings to make sure it could support the users. You don't want a bad customer experience because you implemented a cloud solution where you have a network that doesn't support it. In addition, need to look at the future state, the technologies that are out there. 5G is obviously the big spin. Wi-Fi 6.0, it's out, it's available. It allows you, and so you think about the cable infrastructure from a traditional network, those Cat 5e cables to get the speeds that you can get at Wi-Fi 6 and 5G, you would have to go to Cat 6A at least. Well, that's expensive proposition because not only do you have to replace the cable, but all your entire building conduit in your buildings has to be replaced because the cables are larger. Why do that and spend that kind of investment when you can move to a wireless technology that provides you that kind of capacity without having to make those kind of investments? So you talked about anything as a service, and that's huge. And the reason why, and I use that term broadly in the sense of how the government needs to modernize. Dorothy and Dominic has talked about how they're taking technologies and replacing them out. Where if you look at the cloud, and let's say, for example, you think about email today, you're using it in the cloud. You used to worry about your inbox size. You used to worry about your storage capacity of your mailbox. You being able to send a 25 meg email. You used to worry about where you stored your files onto a storage server, and where now that has become seamless. So the cloud has helped solve some of those challenges that we've had in the past of being able to. We're no longer worrying about those type of capacity issues in terms of being able to scale. Your archiving is built into the solution. You don't worry about archiving your mail because it automatically archives for you. That's the way we need to look at our network. We need to look at it to where it is in what we're doing right now at GSA. We're looking at network as a service, security as a service, and even device as a service. And how do we incorporate so that when you quit worrying about those devices that connect, where the provider can change out seamlessly the technology using a virtualized type technology to also be able to increase capacity when you need it or decrease it. And so moving to an as a service models helps solve those challenges for agencies, just like the cloud has solved those challenges with capacity issues and being able to scale up and scale down. And so agencies are in a constant vicious life cycle management. They're constantly worrying about, what's the warranty on the device, the software license expiring, quite a number of things. And we've got to get out of that cycle. So we're making a concerted effort to where agents can use things, network as a service and security as a service as a capability. And we're also looking even more further out in the future to intent-based networking. So we want the network to be smart, to where it adapts to your business demands of the agency. It is built with security. It's built with, you're not bolting on after fact. You're not worrying about the bits and pieces that build out the network. You want it end to end, and you want to leverage AI and machine learning so that the network can make the adjustments to your business needs without you having human action for it to happen. So those are some of the things we're really focused on over at GSA.
Again, I wonder how much this pandemic will accelerate some of those efforts and maybe help government make a leapfrog into that next gen technology. I want to get a couple audience questions really quick before I turn it over for the second part of the conversation. Maybe you guys can give this 30 seconds each. Someone's asking about opportunities to support your agencies in the near and long term. So what do you need, I guess? And then as a piggyback, someone else asked me about how you guys are at this time looking at emerging technologies like AI and ML, which you just mentioned, Alan. So why don't you guys take 30 seconds to a minute at that one? We'll start with Dorothy and then go down.
Thanks. Once again, I'm going to start with the second question, which is AI and ML. We're definitely knitting those advanced technologies into our business process as we go in small bits. So again, that's part of this continuous modernization approach that we have. So that's a definite part of our present day tool set, and our innovators are also using those tools. What do we need? I like to know from the business community what's coming, what's coming in 2 or 3 years, and what we do is we are constantly reaching for that future thing. So my job doesn't include what we need today. The question is, where are we going, and how can we? And I liked what Alan was saying before about, we have the same basic strategy, which is NSF wants to do NSF's mission. We don't want to be an IT. We're not an IT development world. That's not part of our mission. So the IT is only a support piece. So what we do is that we rely on what's available on the marketplace, and we look for innovation continuously. And we look for, getting out of the business of being an IT shop, of being an IT operations or a networking shop, or developing our own.
Dominic, you mentioned chatbots and stuff like that. Same question over to you.
Yeah, a lot of directions I could go with this. Our vendor partnerships are very important, and another enabler for our success in all this. When we scrambled the jets, we called all of our vendor partners in who we already had under contract for services that promote remote access and telehealth. And they stepped up. They came in and they said, what can we do to help? We want to help the veterans. They were there, and they worked shoulder to shoulder with us to figure out how to scale our capabilities up to the levels we needed them to go. So kudos to our vendor partners. We couldn't do it without them. So, and then, almost as soon as the discussion started about how are we going to scale this capacity up so we're ready for something like this, a discussion started about, okay, when are you going to rip it all out and give the money back? So we wanted to be careful in working with our vendor partners to not just put equipment out there, but put scalable solutions out there that we could, when we were done, scale it back down, and then it's ready next time we have, something like a pandemic or a natural disaster or a homeland security issue. We wanted to do this mindfully and not just put a Band-Aid on it, but wherever we could put some long-term scalable solutions out there. So again, thanks to the vendor community to help us get our heads around that. And then finally, I'll just mention a couple of specific things that, going forward beyond COVID, we want to explore more the notion of bring your own device options. That's an interesting thing for the federal government. I mean, that's been like the holy grail since I was in the Pentagon 15 years ago, to talk about how everybody's got a smartphone. How can we make it so that they can use those to increase their productivity and not give them more equipment? So, I mean, if we could crack that nut for the federal government, that'd be great. And I think users want that. They don't want to carry around, 2 different phones, 2 different laptops. So if we could figure something out that will still secure our citizens' data and provide for availability and integrity, that'd be great. We're looking at virtual desktop solutions now to augment our remote access capabilities. We think there's a lot of potential in virtual desktops, and a lot of feedback from our users is that they'd really like something like that they could leverage. And then, of course, in continuing to increase our telehealth capabilities. I'll just say, like I said, I think we've just primed the pump here for telehealth. I think we've shown it works. We've shown veterans are open to it. And we're going to see veterans coming around and saying, hey, that really wasn't that bad. And I didn't have to drive 75 miles to get to a medical center. I did it from my living room, So for more of the routine checkups and interactions with our clinicians, I think we're going to see an appetite for that increase. So we're going to be wanting to work with our vendor community to see what else we can do to support telehealth, telehearings, telecounseling for the VA.
Thanks, Dominic. Alan, last words to you, and maybe you can address a couple questions that just came in around how device as a service would work. And someone's asking about mobile devices in particular. And then additionally, another question was around how in the world VA and GSA work together to get over 100,000 devices during COVID and the decision making there. Can you address either of those two before we close out? We're already a couple minutes over, but I thought they were good questions.
We had a means to escalate acquisition of devices where it allowed to put those supply chain in priority. So agencies that leveraged us were able to be put in front of the line to be able to get the devices when they used the GSA. And the acquisition community was aware of that process and stuff. So we also, from a device as a service, we are working with OEM vendors on how that would come out as a solution. There are some pilots per se out there and how device as a service is available. But we also got to look at not only from it's being leveraged on the commercial side. We don't want to take a square peg and hammer it into a round hole. We want to make our round hole a square so that we can hammer it in and it fits for the agencies. But we're working hard on that with the various OEM vendors to make sure that that those types of services as a service can be done in a fashion that allows agencies to be able to get the value out of that.
Thanks, Alan. And thank you, Dorothy, Dominic, and Alan, for joining me today. I enjoyed it a lot, and also appreciated a reason to have a button-down shirt and look presentable for the first time in a while. So I'll turn it over to Connie Sayers now. She's the president of Government Executive Media Group for our closing session. But thank you again, panelists. I really appreciate the time.